Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have you most scariest part of the video.
Serious, what's your story of finding a place that should not have existed? When I was driving around casually one weekend looking at open houses and such, just being curious, not really house shopping, I stumbled across an entire cul-de-sac of vacant houses in a nice, upper middle to upper class neighborhood. 6 nearly 7-figure homes, all on the same street, all dead quiet. All the streets around this one was active, well kept, and lived in. This is a fairly in-demand area of Southern California with not an insignificant housing shortage, so vacant houses just don't happen, and certainly not an entire street of them, and certainly not in neighborhoods like this. I was so vexed I called our former realtor, now friend, asking WTF was going on. This got him curious, so he looked into it. All I remember him saying was all the homes appeared to be owned by the same family. The hell? When I was in college, the first-year dorms were these massive 10-story, apartment-like structures. Every other floor, even numbered floors, had a little lounge on the east side of the building with a TV and couches. It was meant to be a community space. We noticed that on the subsequent floors, odd numbers, this space still physically existed but was walled up behind a brick wall for some reason. We managed to pry up some ceiling tiles, climb through rafters, and drop down in. They were literally the exact same lounges as the even-numbered floors, complete with dusty couches still there, just bricked up and not used. No one was ever able to explain to us why they had decided to wall off the student lounges half the building. Or why they left the furniture there when they did so. Having dealt with universities and contractors in the past, here is my take on this. The contract was for a lounge on every other floor. Contractor messed up and put one on every floor. They found their mistake extremely late in the game after the furniture was delivered. If they gave the university more than they asked for, it would end up being a huge headache with the university demanding an audit inspection to see what else was done off contract, which is terrifying for any contractor but especially university ones who like to cut corners. So, the decision was made to wall off the extra lounges at the last minute, so the space appeared as contracted in time for first inspection. No time to move out furniture or anything like that. The money lost was spread out over myriad change orders issued after the initial inspection and before acceptance. Walked into a little neighborhood bar so my wife could use the restroom. Looking for that, I sat at the bar and ordered a beer. The bartender looked at me like I was insane. I repeated myself and pointed to the taps. "Can I get a Newcastle, please?" "Who are you?" "I don't see why that matters." "Can I get that beer?" "This isn't a bar. This is my home. Get out." "Well, can I wait for my wife to get back from the bathroom?" I looked around and noticed that he's serious. He has a nice bar in his living room. But the next room has a couch and a TV. There are pictures of his family on the walls. I guess his door was open when I walked by, and I misread the situation. That was weird. One summer I worked for an underground utility company in the greater DC area. We would put an electronic signaling device on a pipe or wire and trace where it went with a receiver tuned to that specific frequency, marking the ground above it with color-coded spray paint. We were the call before you dig people. Anyway, we were doing a job at an NSA satellite site where they were going to be doing new construction. We were following this wire and it took a sharp turn away from the rest of the utilities and went straight into the woods at the edge of the site. We started tracing that line and marking it off when 4 MPs came sprinting up to us commanding us to halt and demanding to know why we were going that way. We showed them how the receiver was picking up the signal and leading off into the woods. They told us not to worry about it because there's nothing out that way and directed us back to the main area. There was a lot of power going to nothing. I was out running errands at lunch in the middle of July in North Carolina. I stopped at what looked like a convenience store to grab a drink. When I walked in, it was a small Japanese market. Was not expecting that, huh? I go to pay for my soda and see they have a menu board, and I can smell something delicious coming from the back. I decided to order some chicken teriyaki and a rainbow roll. Amazing. It became my new go-to-lunch spot, and I was there 3 to 4 days a week and took everyone I could. Why shouldn't it be there? Because I was in a bumduck, the area of NC, and finding such amazing Japanese food in a tiny little store like that generally doesn't exist in places like that. I moved away 2 to 3 years later. When I went back 6 months after moving, they were gone. I'm fairly certain I was keeping them in business. Me and a group of friends walked around a former Royal Air Force bunker. The site is now open to the public as a museum. However, on our tour we came across this door in a quiet portion of the bunker. I obviously had to have my photo taken in front of it as it looked like something straight out of a movie, lol. Perhaps the bunker didn't close and maybe the RAF or Ministry of Defense are still using part of the bunker for something? I mean, it would be ideal cover, set up part of the site as a Cold War museum open to the public, lol. The door even has a cat flap in it for some reason. We moved to Virginia about 10 years ago. The house was bought on foreclosure, and for the first time, because the water table here is too high for most places to have a basement, we used the attic to store things. In the attic is what can be best described as a hutch, outfitted with electric sockets and extra insulation. Has its own door, too. Mom, a former criminal prosecutor, had seen things like this used to grow weed. We took to calling it the pot house, and now we store Christmas decorations in it. Where I work, there are 3 facilities. The oldest, known as P1, was built in the early 80s and barely runs anymore. There is an upstairs section that used to be a training area. It has been abandoned since about 2005, and when I say abandoned, I mean literally, it looks like everyone just disappeared one day. There are still half-full, rotting cups of coffee sitting on desks, printed out emails with dates from 2003 to 2005, old racks of VHS tapes including ones that are tours of the plants, and one that was Learn Windows 95. A couple other hallmarks of the era like McDonald's fancy ketchup packets make appearances, too. It's really surreal to walk through. There are only 2 ways to access the area, which is quite large. 2 nondescript doors in different areas of the plant. You walk out of the modern office area through the door, and you've gone back in time, but you just as easily never even know the area was there at all, as there are no signs or anything indicating what it is or how to get to it. There is so much usable space there, though a lot of repairs need done as they cut climate control to the area, so it's either insanely hot or insanely cold and is probably mold central, wallpaper is peeling, etc. So, for a bit of backstory, there was a prostitution ring in my town in the 90s. I've done research on it, but there isn't a ton of info other than the guy who was running it got found out, went to prison for a while, continued to run it, and eventually got murdered by one of the prostitutes. My friend was telling me about this warehouse that is basically in the middle of a neighborhood downtown that seems unsure. Eventually we went to check it out, and it was the strangest thing. It's in the middle of a block of houses, basically in these people's backyards, but I'm actually on their property. You can't see it from the road because of the houses and trees and such, but we figured out the best way to get there. It's abandoned and the inside was almost casino-like, with a really nice indoor pool. It seems to fit so well with what has happened in the past. It's just such a strange location that is in the middle of downtown, and yet it's somewhere that no one knows about. In the hayloft of an abandoned cow barn, my friend and I found a corner closet hidden behind bales of hay. It was unusual to discover a closet in a second-story hayloft, so we opened the door to see what was inside. It was filled with many bottles of homemade wine covered with cobwebs and dust. What the wine was doing up there we'll never know. But obviously the former farmers had long forgotten about it. I was working as a post-production assistant and had to drop a hard drive off at our composer's office, which was on the Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. Anyone who lives or has been to the area knows exactly how terrible parking is, so I had to park about 4 blocks away on a side street. For reference, this area is filled with tall office buildings, and the base of the buildings have stores or restaurants built into them. Anyway, as I was walking back to my car, I passed a cool bookstore and was window browsing, when I saw a small alley to the side of it, with a locked bookcase. About 6 first edition books sat in the bookcase, including the first edition of On the Road by Kerouac. I was intrigued and noticed that there was a side passage near this bookcase, tucked into the alley. I walked into this passage, which was no wider than a standard door. It led down a passageway which was tucked between 2 of said office buildings. I felt like I was walking into Narnia. The passage was about 50 feet, and it opened up at the end to a small and quaint courtyard, surrounded on all sides by office buildings, basically tucked into the center of a block, hidden by the buildings. In this courtyard was a small cottage, and a small man sitting on a bench. The man was small in stature, balding, wore spectacles, not glasses. I can only describe these as spectacles, and a sweater vest. He smoked an old-fashioned pipe and saw me. "Hello, young man," he said in a British accent. It was all very surreal, so I told him I saw the bookcase filled with first editions and asked him what this place was. He took me inside the cottage, which was packed with books, and told me this was a bookstore that carried nothing but first editions. And they had anything you could think of: Lord of the Rings, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, any British writer, and he even had an I'm serious first edition copies of Shakespeare. He told me this is less of a store and more of an investment house. Few customers a year, but they treat the books like investments, much like antiques or artwork. I mentioned I studied literature in college, and he talked with me about literature. I mentioned I work in television, and he showed me original screenplays, and informed me that he was a consultant for the Academy Awards. Overall, we talked for a good 20 minutes. I perused the books, trying to find certain first editions. He wished me luck, and I was on my way. It was really surreal, really awesome, and though it doesn't classify as a place that shouldn't exist, it was definitely a place that felt like something out of a fairy tale, or another dimension. The whole experience was, if I do say so myself, quite magical. I never know how much of this is my childhood imagination running wild, but when I was in 3rd and 4th grade I went to a summer camp called Mountain Meadow Ranch. Camp was sick. You got to pick what you wanted to do every day, and they had anything from guns to high ropes to jet skis to day trips to nature hikes to horses. It was amazing. One day I went with the kids from my cabin to what I've always remembered being Virginia City. The drive there was unbelievably scary as it went extremely high up into the mountains and along a super windy road. Distinctly remember seeing a VW bug at the base of one of the cliffs just impaled on a tree, like it had to have fallen off and just have been stuck there for ages. But when we got to the place at the top of the road, it was amazing. The entire thing was like a one-street western town with like gold rush era everything. Candy stores with barrels that cost a nickel for whatever, slideshow movies, including some Victorian-era looking porn for a nickel. That jangly music that always plays at the end of Askreddit videos on YouTube is basically this place, manifested. But here's the thing, it wasn't like a theme park or run fair AIUI, it was a real city where people were living like this intentionally. I guess that there were at least a few hundred people in it, and it was terribly busy. Googled Virginia City, California, and it didn't find it, and now I'm wondering what it's actually called. My friends and I used to hang out at an abandoned weather monitoring station behind an exceptionally large international airport. The area also had gates to get onto the airport proper with cameras facing them. We made sure never to walk in front of the cameras as we were quite sure the whole property counted as airport property, and trespassing on it was a big no. This was post 9/11. Cool place to watch planes take off and land though. We bought this old Victorian house that we lived in for quite a few years. My dad ended up turning it into a restaurant. Anyways, when my parents bought it they went to one of the top floor's rooms and discovered it had apparently been turned into a Satan worship room. There was all sorts of markings on the ground and walls, with red and white paint all over. They had a priest bless it before we moved in, and my sister was the lucky one who ended up sleeping in that room. She said she had nightmares quite a bit while we lived there. The city of Chicago is full of underground neighborhoods. I'm talking about houses, roads, streets, light signs, you name it. The city literally built up over these entire city blocks. My cousin was working at an Ace hardware store someplace on the south side. He was in the basement stocking and noticed a steel door on the floor. He opened it and shined a flashlight down it and saw a house. He asked the owner about it and was told the city built pillars above the older neighborhood but didn't know why. The owner said only a handful of people know about it and it's because the homeless would move into the abandoned subterranean neighborhood. Crazy. I have not talked to my cousin in a while, and I always forget to ask if he went down to explore it. Camping trip. We hiked into a campsite in the middle of the park. The trail was overgrown, but accessible. After about 4 hours, the trail ended at an opening in the trees. We can see what looks like sand. Or maybe rock? Nope. It is sawdust. A massive, packed-down pile of sawdust. Not a hill, it's like a huge hole in the ground filled past the brim of sawdust, probably about 10 meters diameter, sloping down to a small lake. Nothing grew on it, and the trees were at least 60+ years old. We had to backtrack to find the actual site, which was overgrown, had an old canoe just stuck there. This site was nowhere near any canoe routes or portage. Only an idiot would carry a canoe there. The fire pit had weeds in it, and there was a huge spider living on the outhouse toilet seat, locally known as a wharf spider, with legs as big as my hand. Oh, and no toilet paper. We had to evict the spider before using the facilities. That night, we had what was probably the most intense thunderstorm I've ever experienced. The rain was so loud, we literally could not hear each other while screaming at the top of our lungs. I could see the lightning flashes through my eyelids. Fairly sure we angry some primeval god. Maybe because of the spider. When we left, and checked out the next day, the ranger looked surprised at our experience. The weather was fine here. No one's been on that site for more than 5 years. My family moves around a lot, and I always got to go with my mom to check out new homes when I was a kid. In the one we looked at I found a little door and there was a small hallway you had to crawl through leading to a bedroom. I wanted to move there so bad. I never realized how weird it was until I grew up. My college dorm building had been renovated at some point in time, and there were a few phantom rooms that you could get into if you climbed into an attic in the maintenance closet. We discovered these because the folks on the top floor realized that there was a ladder in the maintenance room, and curiosity got the best of them, so we put a magnet on part of the doorknob so it wouldn't close all the way. Housekeeping didn't notice, we climbed up, boom. Hidden stairwells, hidden rooms. Other kids over the years had clearly climbed up into the stairwell, because there were names signed on the walls, along with drawings and such. When I was a kid, around 9 or 10 years old, I was out camping with my dad at a large international site. I buddied up with maybe 12 other kids, most of us from different countries, and we went exploring in the huge forest that bordered the campsite. We were having a blast playing tag and hide and seek and climbing trees, even trying to learn bits of each other's languages as we went. It got to be around lunchtime, and we decided to head back to get some food to have a picnic when we took a wrong turning or something. We ended up at a fence in an area covered in ivy and dry moss. It was about the size of a small cottage and there were rusted out bits of machinery, car parts and bikes and electronics littered around the perimeter. Just behind the gate we started to hear a rustling noise, and after a minute a man popped his head over the gate and grinned at us. He had greasy hair and rotting teeth, and he was masturbating while staring at us. We were all stuck in place until he started laughing and shaking the gate, and then we ran. All the way back to the campsite, with the littlest kids on the backs of the biggest and many of us clinging to each other on the way. None of us told anyone, and I doubt any of us were really aware of what happened at the time. We only knew that we had creeped the hell out and didn't really talk about it afterwards. But the site is no longer open to the public, so there won't be any more kids running around in that forest. I grew up in a small village where the houses were situated along the forest edge. Me and my friend, from the same village, naturally played a lot in the forest growing up. One day, we were maybe 12 and 13 respectively, we were playing in an area behind my friend's house that we seldom were in. We found an old half-burned cottage there. Two things stuck out: it was obviously left in a hurry and an oppressive feeling of not being welcome. Still, we checked it out. There was a bottle of ketchup on the table and a carton of milk in the fridge that dated back to the 90s. The longer we stayed, the more this feeling of we should get out of here grew, and after a few minutes we succumbed to it and bolted out of there. My dad's side of the family has lived in that village for generations, and I asked around, but no one knew anything about it. We never found the cottage again either, but to be honest we didn't really try to find it again. The weird part, that honestly is pretty easily explained, is that a couple of years ago I came to think of this place and called my friend up to ask him about it, to see if it actually happened or if it's something I imagined. No, he remembers everything, both some of the details I remembered and some others that I had forgotten about, except that he is insisting that we were playing behind my house, not his, when we found it. One day I was watching random videos on YouTube and apparently there is an island in the middle of nowhere in the ocean that is filled with nothing but snakes, and a large portion of them are deadly and venomous, and it's said that every 5 feet there's a snake, and it's very densely packed by them to the point it is a restricted area to go to in the world. The island is called Ilha de Queimada Grande, or Snake Island, and it is an island off the coast of Brazil. Many years ago, I had to help investigate the loss of a Dragon missile site. Since it disappeared from the unit's sensitive item area, everything had to be inventoried to make sure nothing else was missing. I had gone outside to check the exterior of the building when I noticed an extra window. I had been in every room and had a good sense of where all the rooms should be, and that one window just didn't match the interior layout. I went back in and started moving steel wall lockers, and we found a door. The room was covered in dust and had old Korea-era equipment, gallons of atropine and other miscellaneous items. Evidently back in the past a chemical warfare unit had been assigned to the building, and at some point the door had been covered over and forgotten. As far as the site, it was found that 2 days later turned in for maintenance. The former supply sergeant had turned it in and did not document it before he exited the unit the month before. When we helped my sister move into college, we found out that at the end of the hall the stairwell had a secret attic type of trapdoor. Me, my sister, and my younger brother all decided to go up there when we were finished. We got up and there was this wide metal beam with railings that went around a probably 50 by 50 foot room. This thing was big. There were wooden panels beneath us, but like a few feet down. Mind you, this was at least 10 feet tall when we were standing on the beams. In between the wooden planks were little patches of light. So, I crawled down. We could see into the kids' rooms. Like, it was a hole in the girls' ceiling, only a few centimeters wide, so she didn't notice. I told my sister, then crawled further until I could see my sister's room. I climbed back onto the beam when we heard a door on the other side of this room space open and heard a man's deep voice yell, "Hey! What the dash?" We booked it back to my sister's room. Eventually, me and my brother went back to that staircase to get the steps tool we used to get up, and saw a man come from a door in the staircase. He looked unsure, but like, creepy teacher unsure, you know? Like he was dressed up, but he was sweaty and out of breath. We're convinced it was the same guy who saw us run through. We never talked about it, and my sister says every time she sees that teacher man she avoids eye contact, just in case. In my middle school, there was a bathroom labeled storage closet or something to that effect. I'm pretty sure the staff labeled it that so the kids wouldn't use it and they wouldn't have to clean it. This was the kind of middle school where kids ripped the soap bag out of the dispensers and stuffed them down the sink drain, after peeing on the toilet paper while it was still in the holder. Because seemingly no one knew about it, it was always the cleanest bathroom in the school, and I used it so much it undoubtedly became suspicious, though I never got in trouble. I saw a teacher coming out of it once, but he didn't say anything, which I guess means the teachers were in on it. I like to go on little adventures sometimes, go exploring and find somewhere new, take a turn down a street I don't normally, that sort of thing. Spices things up, and I take pictures of landscapes for reference. Am artist. I was coming home from a little farm near my house that has a little store and some baked goods, and decided not to turn where I was supposed to and kept straight on. I stopped randomly at the edge of this place, and I just fell off. It was sunset, everything was oranges and yellows, and it was late spring/early summer. There was this strip of newly mowed land between two pieces of property which led to this falling down barn and an archway with dead flowers climbing up it next to a small stone bench. I just kept feeling weird. Like I was being drawn to this place, and I couldn't really express why. The closer I got, the stronger the pull seemed to be, more specifically towards the archway/bench. I was already trespassing, what was a few more feet? And every step I took, I kept feeling more uneasy. Something in the back of my brain kept telling me to turn around and run, that this place wasn't right. My feet kept moving without me really thinking about it, until the unease in my brain was replaced by downright screaming to get out. I stopped walking forward. I pretended to be taking in the view, but really I was just trying to see if the pull I felt was going to get stronger. It did for a few moments, but as soon as I felt whatever grip was on me was released, I ran as fast as I could back to my car. I have no idea what happened, or what would have happened had I kept going, and I never told anyone about it. But I avoid that street like my life depends on it now. When I was in college, I once got lost in a weird marsh and found some large construction equipment. I was at a party drinking and smoking hookah with some friends. Eventually, the night ends and I have to walk back to my apartment alone. It's normally a 5-10 minute walk, and I was supposed to take the second left. Well, in my drunk state, I counted the second left as the first left and kept walking. Realizing I was going the wrong way, I was about to turn around when I saw a path leading into the woods. I figured being so close to campus the path had to be a shortcut. So, I started walking down the path and I found a cardboard box. Inside was an old computer and a cell phone. So, I take it with me thinking maybe there's something cool on it. I kept walking deeper and deeper into the woods. Eventually I realized that the ground wasn't fully frozen, and I was in mud up to my ankles. At this point I had been walking for almost an hour and was starting to get cold. A short while later I came into a clearing. In this clearing there is a number of construction equipment, including a big conveyor belt that went like 2 stories up into the air at a 45-degree angle. I climb up to the top of this thing, and I finally see the lights from campus, a good 3 miles in the distance. I got home around 7 in the morning. My boots and jeans were covered in mud up to my knees, and I ditched the computer at some point. The weird part is that campus wasn't that big, and there was an American Red Cross building that I don't remember passing. I honestly can't explain how I got so far off course without seeing any of the surrounding landmarks. There were tales around our town of a cave-dwelling cult. No one knew much, but one day we set off to see what we could find. We ended up finding an old cave system that quickly became our party spot. No sign of the cult, yet. We ended up driving around later that day and found a road that led to a big fancy fence and whatnot. We estimated it forever, and one day we drove by, and the gate was open, so we pulled in. Immediately a black SUV pulled on behind us. Guy gets out, asks us a million questions. We played the just looking for a place to turn around card, and ask the guy what this place is. He tells us it's an underground research facility. Years later I bring it up to someone and turns out he was friends with the guy. What the deal is, their place was like an incubator. He would offer people the ability to live there and work on whatever project they want free of cost, but they had to share everything including their wives. Ended up meeting the owner a few times. He was grating a creepy. The first time we meet him, he and a girl are sitting at a table at the bar. They've got a third with them, an Asian lady dressed up like 7-year-old Marilyn Monroe. They both drank and just stared at her as she danced seductively and alone on the dance floor. I used to work in an old hotel in a town founded in medieval times. It was a pretty interesting place as some parts were of the original building and the rest was just built over it. We used to jokingly call cellars catacombs as it was maze of long intersecting hallways, some really old archways and sort of empty chambers. Everything necessary, like fridges, lockers, stockrooms, were situated close to elevators or no further than 1 hallway away. I don't know the exact size of the cellars, as I never dared to go that further. I had lost my way to lockers, and so I didn't wander far. Usually. On the last day there I decided to go look a bit further. It was what I expected, a mesh of different building styles, empty rooms, and hallways. I ended up finding a room with a couple of mattresses on the floor and food packages as if someone lived there, or at least had stayed a night. I don't know if those cellars were connected to any other buildings as I ended up going back and leave, and I have no idea where else anyone could have gotten there without any staff noticing. Around 2005 or so, a few friends and I lived in a building where the upstairs had a few apartments, and the main floor was a bill collection agency. One day we discovered that a door to a storage room on the second floor was unlocked. It was filled with religious tapes and books, satanic panic type stuff and whatever. The best part though, is that there was a hole in the floor of one of the closets, which led straight down to the boardroom of the bill collection agency. We would sometimes drop sausages and stuff down there. I worked in an old factory that had been open for many decades. I honestly think some of those machines made tank or planes parts during World War II. The facility was over 1.5 million square feet. Over the years, it has served many functions, from assembly to parts storage, and employed 1,000 or more people. About 10 years ago, it was down to 1 job and about 50 employees. It very nearly closed for good, however. That was not to be its fate. The factory began getting new work, and that meant new employees, like me. During my downtime, I'd explore a bit. Might seem odd, but the building was massive and only half of it was being actively used. The other half was storage or just littered with old junk and broken machines. There was a series of rafter catwalks. I was walking around one day when I came across what looked to be an old office area. No clue because it was suspended like that, but there it was, half barricaded. Most everything was just old office junk like desks, chairs, IBM computers, dot matrix printers, etc. Then I noticed a table on its side leaning up against a wall, and it was covering the door. I moved the desk and went inside. Someone had converted the area into a kind of living space. TV, sofa, fridge, microwave, this area was being used on a regular basis by someone. I assumed it was someone that worked there, some old maintenance guy trying to milk the company. But could also have been someone from the outside that knew enough about the plant to get in and out undetected. Either way, I didn't want to ruin anything for anyone, so I put the table back and just left it all alone. There were other things I could discover. There was an open coal mine you could get into when I was a teenager. I don't mean some small shafts, this was one of the biggest mines in the world when it was active. Idled in the 1970s and closed off, but it was easily circumvented by irresponsible asterisk teenagers. They finally sealed it properly around 2000. Asterisk, and by irresponsible I mean really, do not go in an old mine, there are so many dangers it's not even funny, lucky we didn't get killed. My grandparents decided they needed to live near the hospital, so they suddenly bought and moved into a new house only a year or two before they died. There was a hollow wall in the living room that my grandfather decided to open. I think he was convinced there were animals in the wall, but when they opened it up, there were no animals, just a single bathtub that touched both sides of the wall. It was really random. But honestly it kind of fit the aesthetic since the real bathroom on the second floor was full of apple juice. My grandpa was a bit of a hoarder. About 8 months ago I moved away from my hometown. A few of my older friends, I'm 19, these guys were 30 to 35, knew that I liked exploring abandoned places and decided to show me some of the abandoned places that they explored when they were my age. The first place was nothing special, somewhere I had been countless times, just a hill covered in abandoned mine shafts and World War II bunkers, but the second place was very strange. There was this infamous haunted abandoned inpatient psychiatric care that I thought was just some cliché folktale about an old building near the current psychiatric hospital. They told me that they went there once when they were younger and that it was really cool, but not haunted or anything. Anyway, we're driving up past the psychiatric hospital and we noticed that the old building had been turned into a fancy hotel about 3 years ago. I was super confused, I had never heard of this place, and neither has anyone else I've asked. It looked like a 5-star resort had just been dropped into the middle of a field, dirt road leading up to it, not even much grass around, it was so very out of place. No cars around, no lights on inside or anything, but as we're driving up to it a man wearing a singlet and shorts walks out to greet us, or so we thought. He seemed like there was something wrong with him, like he was scared or worried about something. He walked up to our car as we pulled up and asked us who we were and why we were there. We explained that we just were curious about the place since we had never heard of it before. "You must go, leave now. Goodbye," is all he would say, and he refused to answer any questions. When a few more people started to come out of the hotel we decided it was time to leave. They followed us off the premises and watched us drive away. It was really quite strange. I'm fairly sure that that place was some sort of drug facility or something because that town was infamous for drug crimes. Once a friend told me he knew about a treehouse in the forest near our town which was like a place for some bad guys to drug themselves and you could find drugs there. He said that he never checked the house, but he heard stories about it. I didn't believe since it didn't make any sense for someone to leave its drugs at a random place in the forest. We decided to go there after school and check it together. We were probably 11 years old back then. And here we went, school ended, and we walked through the forest searching for the house and we found it. It was a decently built treehouse about 5 meters above the ground and stairs made from wood planks nailed on the tree. I was too scared by the situation to climb, so my friend decided he was the one who was going to do it. So, he climbs, and he looks through the door of the house and he says, "Wash, are these really drugs?" I still don't believe that there's something there, and then he reaches something inside with his hand and pulls it out so I can see it. It was a transparent plastic bag about 1 to 2 kilograms. Yes, it was really big, full of white powder. He said that there is one more like this one inside, but he can't reach since he was staying on the last stair in front of the house and not inside it. We couldn't say if it was really some kind of drug since we of course didn't try it, and we also had never seen drugs in real life until that time. When I saw the bag I got even more scared that someone will come at this moment and beat or kill us, so I said to him that he should come down already and we should go. He listened to me. He was also scared. We left the forest, and we never went back there again. We were scared to tell anyone else or call the police or something like that, and we agreed it should stay just between the two of us. To this day it is still an unresolved mystery for us if it was real drugs or not and whose were this bags actually. As it was my first day in Las Vegas, it started with a bang if you will. I'd be introduced to the funkiest club of them all, even though I'd no business being here. Me and my friend had just moved here from Atlanta, and we were on the prowl and looking for some kind folks to socialize with, and would we find that soonish. We were walking out of the gas station around approximate 9 p.m. to find this pretty cool looking couple. Don't begin to ask me how people look cool, and me and my buddy approached them, start a conversation with them, for them to invite us to this club that they regularly attended. We took them up on their offer, unfortunately. We'd asked them how the club's atmosphere was, and their response was, it's just awesome, just trust us, we've been here for years now. After we'd heard them talk about how they would brutally beat people up and leave them bleeding out, apparently we were so young, dumb, naive. To understand. They said, the club's named the Green Door. And they'd told us it was a bunch of singles walking around trying to meet new people, so in my head I'm thinking, what a lovely invite. Then we proceed to ride with them to the club. We arrive, mind you we both each pay an $100 cover fee, just to advance into the swingers club, to watch naked old men to couples in differently themed rooms. Worst night ever. At Dulles Airport, there was an old church and cemetery from the town of Willard, Virginia. I'm not sure if the producers of Die Hard 2 knew of this, but it's terribly similar to the one where the bad guys had set up their HQ. The church and cemetery seem to have been either moved or demolished when the airport added a new runway, so don't try to find it. My great-grandma lived in an apartment building in North Dakota near the Canadian border. As you might guess, the winters could get pretty brutal and there was a whole underground tunnel system between the apartment buildings and other facilities, the gym, head office, etc. My brother and I, both from Colorado, a state with wonky warm and cold winters, had never seen anything like it before and went exploring. Some teenagers had set up a lounge area in a nook with a TV and couch, but we didn't want to watch TV, we wanted to see more of this tunnel system. There was one tunnel that had no lights and we assumed we weren't supposed to go that way. Naturally, my brother decided to go down it with a keychain flashlight and I followed. It ended at a cement wall with a door. The door was unlocked and when my brother opened it, it was just another dark hallway leading who knows where. We decided not to venture any deeper and went back to great-grandma's apartment. Looking back, I'm sure it was just a maintenance tunnel or something, but 13-year-old me was convinced we were stepping into a demon's lair. When I was a kid, I used to play in the ruins of Fort Montgomery, aka Fort Blunder. A huge stone fort on Lake Champlain. Built to stop any boat-based invasion of America in the late 1800s. By the time it was completed, the technology of warfare, airplanes, etc., made it obsolete. There is even a debate that America accidentally built it in Canada. It never should have existed. Once as a young teen I found a storm drain deep into the woods behind where I lived. It seemed kind of out of place, especially since it was elevated off the ground. Got a couple friends to help me lift the grate off, and when we saw inside there were some magazines and one of those collapsible lawn chairs at the bottom. Not sure if someone was living in there or if we found some other kid's secret hideout. Wow. But one time I was going camping in August. During our trip, we went hiking. We went up to a tall thing. It wasn't a mountain. Because it looked like metal, not stone. We got to the top, and there was about 2 men in suits walking slowly. My uncle said for us to be silent. I looked where they were going, into a broken house. They opened the door, and we went back to the campsite. We never went there again. We met at a church for scouts when I was younger, and there was a ratty old house right next door. It finally got bought by someone and was scheduled to be demolished, so of course us 12 to 17-year-old boys had to explore it. The doors were all open, so we didn't have trouble with that, but there was still a ton of crap in the house like computer parts, even a working EMIC, engineered tools, kitchen appliances, box ceiling fans and ACs, etc. So, we're all running around this place breaking and sticking things in the walls as you do, when a friend of mine opens a door and finds a crawl space. We jumped down, turned on our flashlights, and it was filled with old computer parts, like thousands of old sticks of RAM, broken GPUs and CPUs, monitors, probably 50,000 DVDs and CDs. It seemed like none of it had been touched since the early 2000s. Very creepy. We all checked it out and got such an odd vibe from it we didn't go back. I work at a hospital. The building is really old and was going through some renovations. One of the things they did was build a new pharmacy, my department, while keeping the current one operating so we would never be without a pharmacy department. When the new one was done, we just moved, and that was that. The wing where the old pharmacy was, and other departments, was walled off and closed down. We were told it was too old to save, so they were going to use it to store our emergency generators and had to build a wall to separate it from the patient care areas because of hazardous materials and such. Well, one day a few years ago when we were preparing for hurricanes, I decided to do some exploring and see if I could locate the generators, so I knew where they were in case we needed to use them. So I went to the old wing. I found a bunch of stuff in storage, but no generators. I noticed the door where the pharmacy used to be was closed, so I tried my key. They rekeyed the new door to match the old one so they wouldn't have to issue new keys to all the employees. The door opened, I walked in, and was met by 5 people who each had their own desk. I noticed one had a gun inside his jacket, and as soon as they saw me, all 5 of them got up and blocked me from walking in any further, and they directed me back to the main building. The next day, I was made to sign a very vague NDA regarding anything I may have come across while preparing for the hurricane. The whole hospital got new keys, and the old wing got a new keypad with an authorized personnel-only sign. When I left that job, I received a letter from a federal law enforcement agency that reminded me of the NDA I signed, and that it expired in the year 2027, not when my employment ended. They kindly included a copy for my records. Went exploring in a storm drain with my friends. First of all, this was very stupid. Some kids died a few years later because it rained while they were in there and they drowned. Could have been us, as we didn't check the weather either. Anyways, the storm drains go deep for miles and miles under the cities, connecting to sewers etc., with no obvious exits. Extremely far, and we found artwork on the wall down one passage, which was like a room. It was some pretty odd stuff, assorted designs and shapes and symbols. I can't imagine how or why someone had gotten that art down there, as the footing was very slippery and treacherous. It was pitch black, and all around terrible. In another small room at the end of another passageway we found burnt-down candles arranged in a circle, like the result of some weird ritual. Again, this was somewhat disturbing considering how deep we were in the tunnels. It was just all around very odd because it was a place where people shouldn't be at all, but seemed more active than it ought to be. Also, we had 2 flashlights between the 4 of us. Yes, we were really dumb. Still was pretty awesome though. My high school was in a converted 1920s-era luxury hotel. Each classroom was a converted guest room. Instead of remodeling the attached bathrooms properly and removing the old plumbing and fixtures, they just threw up cheap partitions and shelving to hide them and make a closet. Totally freaked me out when I stumbled into one that the shelving had fallen down in, and suddenly I realized the tiny closet I'm standing in is actually a big creepy bathroom from the early 1900s. Very Tower of Terror-esque. Well, I know I'm super late to this thread, but here it goes. At my old middle school, at the back of the playground there were these wood-type area with lots of trees and vines, and you weren't allowed into. Which was understandable because the place was a fall and a broken arm waiting to happen. However, we would go in anyways, as any rebellious middle schoolers would do. A little way in there was this huge oak tree that over decades had vines growing all over it. My friends and I found an opening, and when you crawled through it opened up to what was basically a cave created by the vines coming down from the branches of the oak tree. The coolest thing about it was the vines were so thick around it you could see anything from the outside, but enough light came through you it wasn't too dark in there. If you heard a teacher or anyone came up to it, all you have to do is keep quiet and they wouldn't know you are there. We immediately made this our clubhouse and told no one about its existence. Needless to say, lots of making out and boob touching and showing of body parts happened in the clubhouse. No one ever found out about it, and no one got in trouble. So, I'm not sure if this place shouldn't exist or even if this is the right subreddit, but I remember once I had to drop off a Redbox movie after school. The Redbox was across and down the street from my school, and I walked everywhere. After I dropped it off, I figured I'd start exploring a bit and maybe find a quicker way home. At some point I ended up in this surreal neighborhood. It honestly reminded me of one of those dystopian sci-fi movie neighborhoods where everything is matching, everything is immaculate. Like all the buildings were 2 stories tall, and had the same look, even painted the same dark green color. Everyone's lawn was small, well manicured, and it was about 4 or 5 in the afternoon, so the buildings were blocking out some of the sunlight that gave it an eerie feeling. What was strange was there was no one on the streets, and it was quiet and the streets were narrow. There were a few cars parked here and there, but other than that it was empty, like I could barely even hear the cars driving by in the nearby freeway. I got weirded out and booked it out of their first chance I got. I've never been able to find that neighborhood ever since. I even looked on Google Maps and nothing in that area matches with what I seen. Our school is shaped like a fidget spinner, I know, sad, and has 3 floors. Except that on the 3rd floor the 3rd hallway is missing. I remember noticing this in my first year. I saw the map of the 3rd floor and it showed a 3rd hallway. I asked one of the teachers and she just brushed me off. I climbed over some chairs to look through a window and I couldn't see anything. I told my friend, and we were both intrigued by this. We went to where the stairs would be and lo and behold they were there, but closed off with some sort of plastic-like structure that's painted over to look like a wall. Yes, we managed to open the locked door and go in and take a look. It's just an unfinished floor, nothing special about it. Now me and my friends sneak up to make TikToks. Living in rural Louisiana, surrounded by swampy areas, I didn't often try to get far from my back door. One day, I did go exploring with a couple of my grandchildren. We got farther and farther into the woods, which was swamp surrounded by odd washed-out hills and gullies. We came over one hill and found a huge rock, a piece of sandstone that was smoothed off and flattened on the top and sides. It was about 3 feet x 4 feet x 1.5 feet. It was sort of shaped like an arrow pointing toward the river, and it was up on 3 smaller sandstone blocks. A tree was growing around part of it. It looked suspiciously like some sort of altar or table, or ancient monument, sort of Celtic looking. The next day I returned and took photos of it and posted them on Facebook. A friend contacted me and wanted to be taken to the rock with the object of checking for treasure under or around it. The next weekend, he brought a come-along and some rope and a shovel. I took him the same way my grandchildren and I had gone. We looked all day long. No rock altar to be found. I still have the photo but have never seen the spot again. This happened around a year ago. I'm a student at a college in Italy with an excessively big and old main building, filled with hidden staircases and rooms. This building is open 24 hours for all the students of said college. One night me and a friend of mine, moderately altered, decided to use this feature to play College Indiana Jones and go exploring the hidden rooms of our school. We entered at around 2 a.m., started from the bottom and carefully got our way to the upper floors, trying not to leave a single, open, room unexplored. It was a bit underwhelming at the beginning, mainly a lot of rooms filled with folders, old exams, and whatnot. There were some goodies, like rooms with beautiful cool painted ceilings that do not open to the public or a fridge filled with wine, stereotypical, I know, but not the mighty treasure we expected to find. Until the very last staircase. We had given up almost all of our hopes of finding our sacred grail and took said staircase mainly for the sake of completeness. It supposedly led to a chemistry laboratory which was for sure going to be locked due to the high-risk material inside. And it did lead to that laboratory, which was indeed sealed. What was not sealed was an unassuming white door right next to the laboratory one, which led to a very dark false ceiling. We get inside, switch on the light, and find that false ceiling is literally filled with human bones, from tiny fragments all the way up to full, perfect skulls. We had found our university's archaeology faculty deposit, unlocked for some bizarre reason, with its case studies carefully catalogued. I cannot fully describe the sense of fulfillment I felt when our great expedition was rewarded with exactly what we were hoping for, a final crypt with our personal treasure. Maybe not somewhere that's exactly not supposed to exist, but I thought it suited Opie's original question nicely. Well, once when I went over to my Nana's house, who lives in a house surrounded by the woods. But we had a small little playground built for us in the backyard. Once I went out alone with her dog. But the dog kept running into the trees. I was scared at first, but I didn't want to lose the dog. I loved it like it was my own, and I didn't want my Nana to be mad at me. So, I followed it in until I found it by a tree with a backpack hanging from it. Me, being as short as I was, couldn't get it alone. So, I kept finding ways to get it. The way that finally worked was with a big stick I used to get it down. But before I could even search through the bag, I heard someone coming. So, I just bolted it out of there. The dog followed me, of course. Once I got out of the woods, I kept running until I got into the house. I was crying from all of that, and honestly I kind of wish I got to see what was in that bag. I should have brought it with me because it low-key haunts me every day. Haven't told anyone until now actually. My middle school was built in the 50s with a bomb shelter and all that. In band class we could get under the floorboards in the back of the risers. It was like a cave, but it was filled with trash. Wrappers, paper plates, cups, all from years and years of students putting trash in this hole. I went to sleep one night in 2006, got up, went to work, and noticed a mountain peak where one could not be. 8 years of the same view from work with no peak. Every few days or weeks, something changes in the visible geography. I wish I knew why, or how. And the natives don't know. I'd say more, but all the evidence that I have is what I memorized before 2006. Books, tools, and pictures don't transfer, but passwords do. My professor's secret room. Guy had a small compartment that had a key under his desk. It would open the roof door's gate, which is up more stairs, but beside them was a painted over no-handle door, which you would also need the key for. It had ammo knives and a ton of mannequins that were disassembled. I told the principal, who later expelled me for misconduct against staff and students. I had to go to a different college. Driving in rural areas in New England, near the borders of Vermont and Mass, so I am not sure which one I was in. It was late. Well, okay, so late it was actually early. And there was fog, dense fog. Like Silent Hill levels of fog. And like an idiot who dies in the opening scene of a horror movie, I am driving on back roads. First my headlight just up and goes out, cannot use high beams because of fog. I am in the middle of nowhere, I haven't seen a house or town in a long time. The car starts making noise, check engine light comes on. So, I pull over, nothing much around, field and fog and dark. Creepy as hell. I gamble at the engine, I can fix electronics, not engines. I tighten all the things I know. Car now won't start. So, I am in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, on the side of the road. Because of the natural rules of how things work, my cell phone has no service as well. It is like one big cliché. But I am not stupid enough to go wandering the roads right now. So, I reclined my seat and decided to take a nap for a couple of hours until the sun came up. I wake up, the sun is coming up, the fog is going away, and I am in the main street of a tiny town, parked in front of what looks like the Bates Motel house. Houses everywhere. It was the creepiest feeling. I was sure enough in the woods. There was not a light on in any house all night. There was a service station 50 yards up the road. I walked up to it, talked to the guy, who looked perfectly normal. He walked over to look at the car, asked me to try to start it. And it did. The thing turned over right away. And both headlights were working. I drove on, never got the name of the little village, and I couldn't find it on a map. I always felt like I was in this big setup for a horror movie that just didn't pan out. In college, someone said they knew of an abandoned old house we should go explore. I'd never done such a thing, so figured sure, why not? We drove for some time along the highway, on a side road, until we saw the house. We drove over, and along the side of it was an old cemetery. This creeped me out. We walked around inside this house, which seemed oddly left as however it was when the people had left, except for a few places other vandals had obviously tossed things around looking for anything to take. Kid toys, kitchen things, decorative stuff. It was like the people just left one day and didn't come back. Some of the stuff wasn't even that old, maybe 5 to 10 years old, but other stuff like the telephone was from the 1950s easily. There were occasional suggestions that we take cool stuff, but nobody really took anything, that I know of. Someone got freaked out because they saw a car going slowly by the house, assuming they were checking out why we were out there, but they didn't stop and just kept driving. This place was way off the usual roads, so it seemed odd to have another car come out and drive by the place. We ended up going out to the little cemetery. We walked around for some time and the graves were really old, 75 plus years old. Someone in our group felt a connection to one of the graves of some sort, picked some flowers, and put it on a grave. As if on cue, wind started to whip up and it got really dusty and my eyes were overcome with tears from the stuff in the air. Like a storm was coming our way. Sky clouded up a bit, the whole deal. We all got in the car to drive away, but someone said, "Who's that guy?" And they insisted that there was someone standing in the cemetery now, and someone else in the car also saw him and started to yell to go. The person driving threw it in drive and we were off, but the girls who saw this man were super freaked out. Nobody had seen them come from anywhere, not the house or the street, he was just hanging out in the cemetery when we got to the car. A couple of minutes or so time. I saw no one, but they were both absolutely serious and terrified. It was weird, we never went back, and we never talked about it again. This story, it's a longer one, took place in a vast forest that was my childhood home. It was summer in the early 90s at the time, so it was pretty common for kids to spend the day outside all day with minimal supervision. On a particular day, my younger brother, around 7, and I, around 10, were super bored, so we grabbed our backpacks and pretended to be explorers. We had a plan to head deep into the woods to a location that we had found once before with a friend. It was a wide shallow creek that flowed between two large hills. The sunlight filtered through the trees in a very pretty haze and there were different colored pebbles in the stream. The last time we had gone there we just sat on the bank for a long time, ate our lunch, and watched the deer that hung out by the water. We both referred to this as the magic place since it was such a beautiful and peaceful experience. We had a vague idea of where it was, and there were some areas where there were old overgrown trails that you could follow, so we made it our mission to find it again that day. We hiked and sure enough, eventually we found it. There were no deer there this time and it was actually a little foggy when we got there, but still, we found it. Regardless of our victory, we were a little bummed it wasn't the same experience, so we figured we could explore the area a little more. We crossed the stream and went over the other hill and followed the old remains of a trail until it ended at a wall of brambles, trees, and one lone piece of wooden fence that had wire on it. We didn't want to end our adventure at such an uneventful place, so we decided to carefully climb over the fence and brambles to see if there was something interesting beyond there. The other side ends up being this big open field, so we end up walking through it for quite some time before coming upon a house by another large tree leaned. It was definitely an old house, white, peeling paint, sort of farmhouse looking, but it looked like a hodgepodge of unique styles of old houses mashed together due to various additions or repairs. There was also a big A-frame window at the top of the house looking out into the land in front of it. We thought about leaving, since it now seemed that we had stumbled onto someone's property, but we noticed that the house looked sort of abandoned and that there were no vehicles or vehicle tracks on the paths, no signs of life anywhere. Another thing that convinced us to stay were these giant stalks, I'd say maybe 9 to 10 feet tall, of something that resembled wheat or some other golden brown kind of dried out crop or plant. My knowledge on crops/plants is admittedly fairly limited, but I figured that these things usually don't grow that high, so I'm not sure what it actually was. They created these large various pathways that looked like a maze in front of this house. I'd say it somewhat resembled a corn maze that someone might create for Halloween mixed with exceptionally large garden hedges you'd see in an old formal garden. This maze went on and we couldn't resist wandering through it. We played in there for quite a while, but we both kept getting the feeling that someone was watching us from a distance through that large window in the house. The feeling kept increasing and eventually turned to a feeling of dread, so we decided to sneak out and get back to our house ASAP. It was also starting to get darker out, which I think added a bit to the anxiety of making it all the way through the woods back to our house and feeling like we were being followed. When we finally got home, we told our mom about the house and asked her if she knew anything about it. She didn't, but she did try to help us find the area a few times during our walks later on. I have a memory of this place, my younger brother has a memory of this place, and my mom remembers us recounting the story to her when we got home and trying to help us find it again. It has been many years, but I still have no idea what that place actually was. My friend and I used to go on late-night campus explorations at my college all the time, just searching for anything interesting. It was an old college, so we found a bunch of rooftops and used rooms, basement levels that went down 7 stories, entire floors colored brilliantly white with transparent glass rooms, one eye-level sculpture of a well-endowed man's penis, 1,000 cups of wine stacked on the floor, a paintball shooting range, just a ton of stuff. The most interesting thing I found was in my own house though. Back in college some friends and I rented an old mansion that had been built in the early 1920s from an elderly lady. The place was falling apart, but it was huge, and rent was dirt cheap. About 2 years into living there I went to the basement to do some laundry and momentarily lost my balance, reaching out to steady myself using one of the wall panels. It flexed more than I expected, and after some inspection I found that it was removable. Behind it was a small, mostly empty, very dirty concrete room about 100 square feet. I say mostly empty because right in the middle there was a hole the size of a well that had been previously bricked up. It must have been old because the bricks had eroded at some point and exposed some of the holes, maybe a 2-foot diameter circle out of the full 5 feet. After calling my friends down to look at it I got the courage to creep a little closer and peer down into it. There was another room roughly the same size but deep, maybe 15 feet down, and mostly dirt. We shined a flashlight down into it and I could swear there was a teddy bear at the bottom. Unfortunately, despite plenty of bargaining, none of us were ever able to work up the courage, liquid or regular, to tie a rope and climb down for a closer look. Especially after we noticed that the bricks which I thought had fallen in were all accounted for, scattered around the hole as if something had broken out. We did a little research and think the sub-basement may have been related to Prohibition, but honestly I'm just willing to accept that explanation in order to avoid lifelong nightmares. In my younger just graduated, me and my friends used to explore the Hudson Valley for haunted places and urban legends we accumulated through classmates, older siblings, and the imaginatively deceptive. Peekskill Hollow / Cold Spring / Quaker Hill Lingdover, some in the Kentwoods etc. There are a lot of strange things in the woods and along the back roads. Standard haunted, abandoned houses, stone huts that litter the woods resembling Celtic druidic structures, and of course the standard paranormal locales and legends. One of those nights, me and my group of friends heard of a legend involving an abandoned house in Cold Spring / Carmel on Peekskill Hollow RD. One of our older siblings relayed the tale. In the 80s, a family lived there but the spouses were going through a divorce. The husband was out on bail after kidnapping his estranged wife and daughter, in which he had kept them handcuffed inside the house for a couple of days. While he was awaiting trial on bail, he snapped. Drove to the house to find his wife with a young lover, which further broke him mentally. He killed both his wife and her lover before driving his car to the Tappan Zee Bridge where it was found abandoned. To this day, it remains unknown if he jumped to his death or simply created a new life. Apparently, this source of legend was still acquainted with the surviving daughter of the family. This is the alleged source of where the next tidbit stems from. Where this really grabbed our interest were the claims that the husband was involved in organized crime, and the abandoned house in which he committed the double murder was actually a kill house. So, being 17-18-year-olds with some marijuana to induce paranoia and imagination, a tank of gas for exploration, folding knives along with a baseball bat for defense, and our flashlights and Nextel phones to fulfill the role of amateur douchebags in training, we set out to find it. Well, the search took a while. Peekskill Hollow Road is a very windy, blind turn-infested wooded road with a local reputation for single-car accidents. The driveways along this road can be pretty long, and the description we were looking for was across from a big field, on the right, northern, side of the road, an overgrown gravel driveway that goes uphill into the woods. You'll know you're in the right place when you are halfway up the driveway and start noticing rows of abandoned cars. After about 4 failed driveway selections, we noticed a promising tree-free, grass-filled drive with what appeared to be 2 indentations of old tire pads. Me and my fellow Duchesnes start up the road, my friend Ant driving his red 97 Eagle Talon slowly through what appeared to be a prairie in the low-riding car. This would be the first scary moment. There were easily about 50 cars, all parked in the woods on the sides of the driveway. Newer models, older models, BMWs, Oldsmobile, Fords, Jeeps, rusted, newer, middling. No plates, and we were too bitch mode at that moment to check for vents or something intelligent. Then we finally got to the house. Single-story ranch style with a basement garage that had a hideous garage door that screamed 70s beige. Tall grass surrounded the house, minus a small deck. The back door came out of that had a very weathered wooden chair knocked over blocking the stairs. We commenced breaking in through the garage. It wasn't locked at all, quite an easy entrance compared to the other legal entrances we previously made. It was really, really eerie. The house was still fully furnished, still had a pot on the stove and an outfit laid out on the bed. As if the residents just evaporated mid-morning. On the far side of the bed, we found what we all surmised was the location of the murder, judging by the deep brown stains between the wall and bed there. There were random brown spots throughout the entire top floor. Really creepy to see that someone had been trying to escape with their life. Half a brown footprint stain still existed in the hallway shag carpet. After we were inside the house for maybe 20 to 30 minutes, we heard the faint sound of tires spinning in mud, and I'm quite sure at least one of our boxers was soiled based on the sudden smell. We sprinted through the house and out the garage to our car, and couldn't see where the car was, but knew it wasn't coming off the main road, but rather the driveway based on the sound of tires spinning in mud. So, we started driving back down to the road with our headlights off. As we come around the only bend in the driveway, and start down the hill, we can see one of the abandoned cars spinning its tires with a couple guys behind it rocking it back and forth in an attempt to find traction. Our teenage, marijuana-infused brains all decided to act cool. We rolled by 3 surprised men going 5 to 10 miles per hour with our headlights off, the sound of our car masked by the engine and spinning tires of theirs. The 2 men behind the stuck car rocking it glance at each other, and one yells in his face, "Who did you tell?" Followed by him reaching for something in the car. We took off and didn't look back, nearly crashed 2 or 3 times on our escape down the road back into street-lit Carmel, and proceeded to not talk about it for fear of being discovered by whoever was stashing cars there for whatever reason. Cheers.